So one of my least favourite Assassin's Creeds has to be Syndicate. It wasn't like I hated the game, because I don't think there's a single game in the franchise that I can say is actually bad. I think it's just a mixture of disappointment because I was so excited for the setting of London, being from England. So it's not that part that made it slack. It was more the combat that I wasn't a fan of, and that's probably due to the fact that they focused way more on stealth this time. And then the same with parkour they took away from in terms of actual climbing and the usual free-flowing sequences, because they introduced all of the new carriage vehicles and zip lines. And then the story, which is a whole other thing, which I'll get into later, but the setting in my opinion is one of my favourites, and they did a great job at capturing the atmosphere of that time period. And there's plenty of famous landmarks to discover, such as Big Ben, Buckingham Palace, the Tower of London, Tower Bridge as well. It was so cool to see them in an Assassin's Creed, and as we know, this is the most modern day setting they've done so far. In terms of story, we have the main protagonists, Jacob and Evie Fry, who are of course siblings, twins, and that might be my favourite part of the story, just their relationship together and seeing how they barely get along but stay with each other the whole game. But then it also shows a totally different side to what we're used to in terms of the assassin in the series, where they don't feel overly special, and I think many people can agree with that. It's like they're your everyday person, you know? Maybe a bit more for me because they're also English, but it just makes them stand out in that assassin lineup, because in all honesty, they aren't great. And if we had to put them in a tier list of how good they are as an assassin and that job, they would be at the bottom, very low. It feels though they stay very beginner throughout the entirety and don't have that much development, you know, or at least we don't see it or get that feeling. Where yes, it's kind of funny and Jacob definitely plays into that role. You know, it's light-hearted in many areas, but as a main protagonist that you're meant to root for and, you know, feel rewarded by as they climb up the ranks, you just don't get that with this game. It leaves you feeling a bit disconnected and just forgetting about the narrative, really. The same with some of the side characters and the main antagonist of Crawford Starrick. I honestly forgot him, to be honest. They just aren't memorable for me. Not all of them, I know. It's usually just smaller ones that are actually quite good, but Starrick just feels so generic to me, and the fact he's not remotely based on any accurate figure in history, but somehow controls basically everything in London, and he's just taken over the whole entire city. It just seems a bit cheap. It also doesn't help the story just feels all over the place, and there's not much consistency in terms of what you're actually doing and how much of a purpose it has. If I had to choose, Evie is my favourite out of the twins, and I think that's majority of people, and you can tell she actually tries to stitch things up and is way more focused, whereas Jacob is just there for a laugh, it feels like. However, the combat mechanics in the game may be what takes it down the most for me, and I don't understand how regressed it's got, you know, 7 games into the franchise. It's actually quite impressive. Unity's combat could have been better, I know, but at least it felt somewhat good, and also visually as well, whether that be the animations or the fact it was a slower pace as well, because it had some difficulty to it. It made you think way more about what you do because you had the time to do it, whether you like that or not. Whereas with Syndicate, it's like there's no good way to go about combat. The only thing I can say is the stealth, which they focused on more, but it should be a balance between the two, at least for someone who just wants to have fun with it. Its majority is just combos and constant spamming, where there are plenty of weapons to choose from, which basically save the boredom. It also helps because the enemies have so much health as well, and that's quite possibly the worst matchup you could have with a button mashing combat system. And when I mention the weapons improve it, I mean the throwable ones as well and the smaller items. The actual main weapons that you can use in combat are the canes and the knuckles, which does look cool on paper, and I was intrigued to see how it felt, but actually using them, it makes combat feel way less impacting. However, I didn't mind the kukris, I think that's how you say it. They're like smaller swords basically. Then again, I'm sure if you used those weapons in, let's say, Brotherhood or 3, it would be great. The system is what completely ruins it and takes it down, and just makes it feel so repetitive. The same with the variety in enemy types, so you can try and go about them in a different way, but maybe that's why, because you can't. And when you do eventually take someone down, there's some pretty cool animations, I must say, in terms of the finishes, and a good variety to them, which adds a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. There's also the recruit feature, which I barely saw myself using, to be honest. It's a cool thing to have, but they aren't the same as your Brotherhood, which was in the older games, and I did find quite useful back then. You can find them all over the map, and even more if you liberate a zone on the map. I think 5 in total you can do at one time, and they just help you attack and defend. So they aren't actual assassins that feel like part of your Brotherhood, because they're not. It's more so just rooks you can pick up on the fly, but you can also upgrade them as a whole with a few, skill tree upgrades such as more health, but in terms of individual customization, there isn't much. But it wasn't necessarily bad. I mean, there's a few moments where they got in the way, but overall, I didn't see it as a game-changing feature. And on the topic of upgrades, there is a fair bit to get your hands on, and there's different areas that have their own skill tree for you as a player, separate ones for both Evie and Jacob, of course, as well as your gang, as I said, and also your tools. So there is quite a bit, and I see it more as a leveling system that sort of teased for what was about to come in the RPG games, like Origins, which was the next game after this, and so you can match the increasing difficulty of the enemies, but also different because you have to upgrade yourself to level up, and the game doesn't do it for you. So if you didn't touch the skill tree the entire game, then I believe you wouldn't ever level up. Usually it's flipped, and you upgrade after leveling up with the new skill points, but then again, there were some skills that did alter your gameplay quite a bit, with others not doing a huge lot, and usually those would just come with leveling up. Now, since the game's initial release, there have been quite a few updates and improvements made. I know the vehicles were super buggy at the start, as well as the game running smoother on PC, and I believe it received a 60 FPS update for consoles a couple years ago, which I think is great. And I won't say there's any bugs in combat. I think that's just how it looks in terms of its physics, where enemies might clip into stuff so easily and shake everywhere when you kill them. It just seems so emphasized and off-putting compared to other games. Again, not sure why they would make a change like that, since the ragdoll physics were pretty fine in other titles. Moving on to the vehicles, which is another helpful aspect with the open areas, and are implemented way more than I expected. And there's a few missions actually early on where they are the main focus, quite a few. And there's features such as ramming you can do, even though it's kind of difficult to do in my opinion. Like there's one mission where you have to damage the carriage, and for some reason I found it quite tricky to do. And as I mentioned about the bugs earlier, it doesn't mean they don't exist at all, as the vehicle mechanics can go crazy at some points where they get stuck. So yeah, it was needed, and it's one of those differences with being the most modern day setting they've done, for the better or the worse. Now there is the rope launcher, which again, I think it is needed, as although I like the setting, it does have quite a few open and sparse areas, so you would just be running around. So while I felt it took away from the actual climbing parkour, which I like to do, it would also be hard to get around the map because there isn't that many opportunities to do that, so it's a lose-lose really. But as a mechanic, it was unique and was quite fun. It's not super fast because it's not like a zip line, you basically pull yourself up and down it, and you could easily spend the entire game just using that for parkour, which I don't know, it could be repetitive in that way, so I tried to climb where I could. And even though for the actual parkour mechanics it's never going to be as good as Unity, but it's not the worst I've seen in the series. One of the big additions they did make to the game since its launch is the Jack the Ripper DLC, which adds an entire new storyline to the game focusing on the infamous serial killer, which I heard is even better than the main game. I just haven't played it myself. It also adds some new gameplay features such as the fear mechanic, I heard, which allows you to scare enemies, which was quite unique, as well as new weapons, outfits, and even locations. I do need to play it, maybe I'll do a separate video on it, as I have heard it's amazing and how a DLC should be done. I also want to go back to the customization and the upgrading, which was another thing in itself that they for some reason didn't follow on from Unity, such as the outfit customization. I'm sure there's some players that look into it more than others, but Unity had one of the best customizations in Assassin's Creed, probably the best. You could alter and switch individual parts of your outfit, like the legs, the hood, etc., and really get creative, as well as changing their colours and mixing and matching them. Fast forward a year later, and we now get to choose between a full outfit, which doesn't seem as fun or creative, especially for Victorian era London. It was all there to go full out with your outfit customization. Instead, we're stuck just to set outfits, which still look great and there's a lot to them, which you can also change the colour of, but just nowhere near as detailed in terms of the editing. And I think that's where I end my video of Assassin's Creed Syndicate in 2025. I mean, I didn't mind playing the game, and as I said at the start, that's the case for every game in the franchise. There's not one that I would never touch again, and that's largely due to the setting of them all, with each one being different from the last. Even though the gameplay might be very similar, or worse sometimes. So there is flaws to talk about with the game, but I think a lot of that comes from comparing the games and the overall regression of so many features that don't make that much sense as to why they did it. And then there's some new aspects that we had never seen in any other game to this day, like the rope launcher, the carriages, and the switching between two protagonists, although that has actually been followed on in Shadows now. And I'm sure many people would like these new things and find them better, as well as the story, which was also different because of who the characters of Evie and Jacob are like and how they act, compared to the other serious protagonists. They feel way more light-hearted and don't have much backstory to them. Again, some players may prefer that. So it's always quite hard to say with the Assassin's Creeds, but hopefully from this review you've got an idea. For me, especially if it's your first introduction to the series, I wouldn't say to play this one. I'd say it's, you know, the least assassin feeling game they've done in terms of the linear games, not including the RPG ones, but that's just me. So if you did enjoy this video, then let me know by tapping that like button down below, and if you enjoy single player and also multiplayer games as well, then that's what this channel does focus on. I have many playlists on a selection of games, so you can subscribe to the channel if you'd like to. And if you want to support me any further, then you can become a member of the channel at either level 1 or 2 to gain access to various perks. Thank you all for the support and watching until the very end. And that was Assassin's Creed Syndicate in 2025, and bye bye.